To be a Spartan fan this year.
Oh. It's fun anyways, no matter which side of the fence you're on. So
Yeah. Well, we're one of those house divided. My daughter went to Michigan State, son went to Michigan, so be a Spartan fan this year.
last week was a little traumatic in your household, huh? I had a heck of a time getting
No
on
Michigan
here.
game today, though.
Nope, I
No
don't
Michigan
think so.
game today. They're got a bye.
I haven't looked at my schedule, but
Yeah, they got a bye.
I think I got to buy. Well, the big game will be in a few weeks.
Yes. Glad it's not next weekend because I'm going to be in Georgia, Old Car City, teaching a workshop.
Oh wow, neat.
Ooh,
So
Yeah, that always
sounds like
I always
fun.
sound like a neat place to go.
It's
Yeah.
amazing, amazing. It's
Okay.
got 4,500 old cars.
Yeah, wow. All right, we're going to get started. Thank you, everybody, for coming today. Hey, we got a nice number of people that have shown up. Welcome to the Digital Forum, the place that you can get your questions answered in the second hour. The first hour today, we have a Mike Moats to talk on macro photography and the equipment needed for that. But just to let everybody know that next month in November, we have Robert Canis talking about the Nordic seasons. December will just be a video that I will put out that will be updates on what's happening with Lightroom and Photoshop. In January, we have Jamie Konarski-Davidson going to be talking about lens babies. And I'm working on a guy from the Tetons for February. We'll see if that plays out. And the rest of the year we have open yet. So we're working on a number of different speakers. If anybody has a speaker they think would be good for our group, please either leave it in the chat or email me, and I'll be glad to try to see about getting them to talk. So Mike Moats is an international award-winning full-time pro macro photographer from Michigan. He is a Tamron Image Master, Vanguard Pro, and his articles and images have been published in many photo magazines for over 18 years. He has a macro photo club online with over 2,800 members from 28 countries. Mike teaches workshops and speaks at photo conferences throughout the US. We've had Mike a number of years ago, I think it was 10 or 15, where he did a in-person one when we used to do in-person seminars for WACO. And now we're doing everything, of course, just by Zoom. But thank you, Mike, for coming. Let me just get you spotlighted here and we can get started. Let's see, replace spotlight. There we go.
Right, I'll share
there
my
he
screen
is.
here. How y'all doing today? All right, let me get the first slide up here. All right, Jeff, you see the slide?
Yep, looks
We're all
good.
set then. All right, sounds good. All right, so I'm going to start off with my equipment that I use. And about 2 years ago, I finally broke down and got the mirrorless camera. I've been seeing them in my workshops for quite a few years. And one of the problems I had was people would ask me about their cameras, and I didn't quite understand the mirrorless systems yet. So I thought it was about time that I get a mirrorless camera and start using one. And so far I've been very, very happy with it. I've got the Fujifilm X-T30 Mark II. The reason why I chose Fuji was because my sponsor Tamron, which provides me for lens at the time, only had lenses for two different mirrorless brands, which was Sony and Fuji. And I liked the Fuji camera, the way it was set up with little knobs on top and all that. And I just thought it was a nicer system, easier to use for me. So the nice thing about the mirrorless is, as you can see on the bottom there, it's half the size of the body of my Nikon D7500. So that really cuts down on space when I'm traveling, and also just the lightweight of it, more compact. The lenses, as you can see, aren't much difference because both of those cameras have the same size sensor. They're both C sensors, crop sensors, and you still need the same size lens to produce the image on that sensor. So you don't really save a lot in the size of the lenses. Now, if you had, say, like a Panasonic or a Olympus systems, those are different, smaller sensors, and they have smaller lenses. But your Nikons and Canons and Sonys and Fujis, which have the C sensors and the full frame sensors, are going to use the same basic size lenses that you did with your DSLRs. But I do like the more compact system of the body. Now, as far as macro lenses, they come in different focal lengths. So you have a short range, mid range, and a long range. And these are the ones that were the most popular over the years. In the short focal length over on the left side, you'll see a 60 millimeter. That is a Tamron, Nikon, and Canon. Sigma actually had a 50 millimeter. That was their short focal length. In the mid range, on the low end, the one that I used for many, many years was the Tamron 90. And then you go to the 100 from Canon, 105 from Sigma and Nikon. And then in the telephoto, the long range macro lenses on the low end would have been the Sigma 150, and the 180 was always the most popular, and that would have been Tamron, Sigma, and Canon. And then the longest of the true one-to-one magnification macro lenses is the 200 millimeter from Nikon. Now, one thing that you won't find is many macro lenses for sale now for your DSLR cameras. All the lens companies and companies that produce lenses are getting away from selling lenses for digital SLRs. And the macro lens is one that I find is pretty much, most of them are gone except for these two. I called Hunt's Photo, asked them, I says, what do you guys sell in new macro lenses right now for DSLRs? We got two, Canon 100, Nikon 105. Tamron, my sponsor, has no macro lenses that they sell for DSLR cameras. And what they're doing is they're putting all their energy into building lenses for mirrorless cameras. That's kind of where everybody's heading. So it's hard to find them. Now, those lenses that I talked about are still available, but you're going to have to buy them used. So you're going to go to either eBay or some of the camera stores that sell used equipment, or KEH, sells used equipment. So you can still get those lenses, but you're going to have to get them used. Now, where they're putting all their energy is into the mirrorless systems. And you can see what's being offered now at Hunt's Photo for mirrorless cameras. So a lot of lenses are being produced, and there's going to be a lot more coming out. Tamron has got the Fuji and Sony lenses, but now they're starting to get into some Nikon, and eventually Canon's going to allow them to build lenses for their bodies. And so you'll see a whole new crop of lenses are going to pop up in the future. But these are the macro lenses, and you can see a lot of them available for mirrorless, but for your DSLRs, you're going to have to go to your used market, other than if you get that Canon 100 or the Nikon 105. Now, that's not to say that a dealer still doesn't have some macro lenses on their shelf in their store that they haven't sold yet. So there may be still some new ones out there on the shelves in the stores, but once those are gone, they won't be able to order anymore. I'm going to talk about the three different ranges now of those focal lengths. Now, the image on the very top right is a 60 millimeter Tamron macro lens, and I'm going to photograph this Rosa Sharon flower. Now, if you know that flower, it's a pretty good sized flower. It's not a small flower, it's pretty big. Now, in order to get that to fill the frame, you can see how close I have to get with that 60 millimeter lens. And the image that I photographed with it is up in the upper left corner. So you can see I don't have a lot of what we call working distance. I've got to get in really close with that short focal length lens. Now, the next image below that is a 90 millimeter Tamron lens. And in order to get the exact same framing, like I did with the 60 millimeter, I have to back away from that flower. So again, this is what we call working distance, and I've gained some working distance between me and that subject by using the longer mid-range macro lens. Now on the bottom, that's a 180 macro lens. Look how big that lens is. And that is your telephoto macro. And you can see how far away I am from that flower to get the exact same framing as I did with the 60 millimeter. So why is that important? Well, let's say that flower was a live subject. Let's say it was a butterfly or a dragonfly. It probably wouldn't be too happy if I'm using a 60 millimeter and I'm, 15 inches from its face. More likely, it's going to scare the bug away. But if I was using a telephoto macro lens on the bottom, like you see, look at the working distance I have. So I have a much greater chance with live subject matter to get that subject to stay there when I'm using those longer telephoto macro lenses. Now, most people, and I would say it's a good 90% of the people that come into my workshops with macro lenses are using mid-range. They're using the 90, they're using the 105, they're using the 100. And the reason why those people are in that range is because it's in the price range they're willing to spend. A lot of people didn't get into the telephotos because they were a lot more expensive. Some of them over doubled the price. And so a lot of people that maybe didn't dedicate their whole time to macro would say, well, I want to do some macro, but I don't want to spend a fortune getting a telephoto lens. I'll just go with the mid-range and that'll be good enough and it'll save me some money. So that's why you see most people in that mid-range. And I honestly, it's a good 90% of the people in my workshops would come in with mid-range. Very few would come in with the telephotos. And I would occasionally get someone in the short focal length, but most people are in that 90, 100, 105, and those are good lenses. I mean, I used my 90 millimeter for quite a few years and it worked fine because a lot of what I do is shooting just stationary subjects that aren't going to fly away or move. So the 90 worked just fine. Now, when I shoot my critters, my bugs, I do it at daybreak on cool mornings when the body temperature is lower down. So I can, they're going to stay stationary and they're not going to fly away because their body temperatures are too cold for them to move. So I get out there right at daybreak on mornings in the upper 40s, low 50s, and I can literally work my tripod in there, get my shot, get in real close, not have to worry about that bug taking off. But if you're shooting later in the day when they're flying around, it's more difficult to try to capture those guys when you're getting in real close to them. Now, about 5-6 years ago, it's got to be at least 6 years. They started coming out with zoom lenses that had what they called macro capabilities. Now, they weren't true macro lenses in the one-to-one magnification sense like a true macro lens, like those ones I just talked about. But they were a 1-to-3, which would get you in still pretty darn close. Much closer than your older zoom lenses, which you'd have to use like teleconverter, or not teleconverters, but those rings that you put on between the lens. God, I can't remember that. Extension tubes. Thank you. Yeah, you'd have to use extension tubes to get that lens to focus in closer. But now they've created these zoom lenses that have the extension somehow built in there that allow that lens to focus in really close. And so that's a pretty big deal. So the lenses that I use is the 18-400 for my DSLR, and then the 18-300 for my mirrorless camera. So those are the two lenses I use. And I will be honest with you, I almost never use my macro lens anymore. These are the two lenses I use for pretty much everything I shoot now. Now, what I like about having that wide range is that if I wanted to show you a shot like this, environmental shot with me out there shooting in a swampy area, I can set up that 18-400 on another camera on a tripod and then photograph myself out there. And I can use that 18 millimeters to get a wide angle. And so that's a really nice, feature to be able to get this wide angle shot when I need it for an environmental thing. And then if I have to reach out and capture this frog in a little pond, I got 400 millimeters or 300 millimeters, depending on the lens I'm using, to reach out and capture that frog. This was actually shot with the 18-400 at the Chicago Botanical Garden. Was in their greenhouse where all the cactuses are. And on that particular day, I was lucky to capture this flower growing out of that cactus. But that's a pretty tight shot with a zoom lens. You can actually shoot as small as 1.5 inches by 2.5 inches. That tiny of an area. 90% of what I photograph, at least 90%, is larger areas than 1.5 inches by 2.5 inches. So those two lenses will produce 90% of what I shoot. And if I did need to, want a smaller area out of that, I could get into as small as I can and then just crop out what I want if I wanted it to be smaller than the 1.5 by 2.5 inches. So those are the lenses that I use on a pretty much 100% of the time. I pretty much leave my macro lens at home, and I'm just using the zoom lenses now. Tripod I use is the Vanguard VEO 3 Plus 263 AT. Excellent tripod. Comes in this would be listed as the AT, which is aluminum tripod, but they also have it in a carbon fiber. I don't notice a lot of difference between the carbon fiber and the aluminum as far as weight goes. So I always tell people, if weight's not an issue, go with the aluminum tripod. It's probably about $100 cheaper. Now, what's nice about this tripod is it has a center post that'll rise straight up and then go into a horizontal position, as you can see here. So when I need to get out over top of a subject, I can move that center post up, go into horizontal position, and get right directly over top of my subject I want to shoot. Now, Manfrotto had a tripod for many, many years that does the same thing. It goes into a horizontal position. The problem with the Manfrotto tripods is that if I needed to move that camera now closer to that subject I'm shooting, or raise it up farther away, I would have to do with all 3 of the legs of the tripod, so which would be a hassle to have to go and adjust all 3 legs to get the camera to move up or move closer to the subject. With the Vanguard, it's got a little lever on the side there that you release, and that center post will actually dip down or raise up so you can move the camera closer or farther away. So that's a nice feature. Nice thing is you can move the tripod out of the way if you're shooting flowers, or you can take the legs straight out on this tripod and put the base directly right onto the ground, and with the extension center post extended out like you see it, you can literally put that camera right down on the ground if you need to. So great tripod for macro photography. The other nice feature in the VEO series, which they came out with in this latest series, is that one of the legs unscrews from the tripod and it turns it into a monopod. So if you go to say a botanical garden, they say, well, you can't bring tripods in. You could unscrew one of the legs, put your head on top of it, and then they're usually pretty cool about monopods. They just don't want legs sticking out where someone's going to trip over them. So that's a nice feature, having that. And the tripod is not that expensive. It's a little over $200, which, compared to stuff like Gitsos and Really Right Stuffs and that's a fraction of what those tripods cost. So it's actually an excellent, well-built tripod for not a lot of money. Now, most people probably are using a ball head, has that big metal housing that in the top portion, you got the ball sitting in there. And that is pretty standard for most people. Now for macro photography, that little U slot that you see in the front, that is where we move our camera down into to shoot down towards the ground. A lot of times we're shooting towards the ground or into a low area. And so you would have to position your camera into that little U slot, and then maybe you'd have to pivot the ball head back and forth to get into position. Now, it can be done, but I've got a head that's much, much easier to do, and that is the Acrotech Ultimate ball head. Now, if you notice, they've cut away all that big metal housing that houses that ball. And this makes it super lightweight. It's made out of aluminum, again, very lightweight. The main feature of this for the macro photography is that they've cut away this front portion here. And that allows that camera to maneuver into any position I need to take it. I don't have to work into the U slot like on a standard ball head and to maybe pivot the ball head back and forth. I can leave it right there and just maneuver my camera anywhere I need to go for framing up my subject. And that's really a big important thing, is because if you're a landscape wildlife photographer, you're just shooting straight ahead all the time. But with macro photography, we are down low, we're in all different weird angles, and we're constantly maneuvering our cameras into different positions for framing our subjects. So this ball head makes my life a lot easier. Now, it is not an inexpensive head. It runs, I think the last I saw it was $369. So it's not cheap, but there are heads that are more expensive than that, like Really Right Stuff and Kirk's and some of those other ones. But yeah, it's a little pricey, but if you're really into macro, it really makes your life a lot easier when you put it on top of that Vanguard tripod. Works a great system. Now, of course, it can be used for any type of photography, not just macro. It really shines as a macro ball head, but it can be used for any type of photography. I know actually a couple pro photographers, landscape photographers, that actually use the same head. Accessories. Now, there are a few accessories that we do carry as macro photographers, but I don't have time to cover all of them with all the other things I need to cover today. But I wanted to talk about the most important accessory, and that is a diffuser. Now, this is a Dame's rocket flower. And if you see the petals on the top portion of the flower, they're kind of a pinkish color. The problem is they're not pink petals. They're supposed to be purple petals. Now, a lot of times you're out shooting on maybe a sunny day, and that harsh sunlight's hitting your subject and it's washing out some colors. You kind of understand what's going on with the sun and the color loss and that harsh light. This was shot on a cloudy day. This was a overcast, cloudy day. Even on a cloudy day, there's enough light, intensity of the light coming down, and also the reflections off those white clouds coming down that can wash out colors on our subjects. Now, it's typically the areas of the subject that is running somewhat parallel to the sky. All right. Those are the areas that tend to wash out. And it doesn't happen on every single cloudy day. It's really weird. Some days it happens, some days it doesn't. So what we need to do is carry a 12-inch diffuser. Now, they do make some larger ones, 20-inch, 22-inch. I carry the 12 because it's more compact. It actually folds down into itself into a little round circle about 4 inches across. I can literally fit it in my pocket. So I carry the 12-inch with me because I'm generally just shooting single flowers. All right. Now, once I put that 12-inch diffuser directly over top of that Dame's rocket flower, it brings the color back to the natural purple. So all I did was just place that diffuser over top of it, and it went from the image on the left to the image on the right. And again, this is on a cloudy day this happens, all right? Most people would assume on a cloudy day, you wouldn't need a diffuser. You've got a giant diffuser up there already. But yeah, there's enough light intensity and also reflection off those clouds that can wash out colors. Now, on that same cloudy day, I was walking down a pathway and I happened to see this leaf on the left. And I noticed the top of the leaf. I could see this with my eyes. The top of the leaf colors are gone. And again, a cloudy day this is. So you can see the top portion of the leaf washed out. Now, what is the top portion? Parallel to the sky. See the front of the leaf where it dips down 90 degrees to the sky? It retains its color. So it's those things that are running parallel to the sky. So I put my diffuser over it, and I can get the color back on the top. Now, the color is still not quite as dark on the top as it is on the front of the leaf, but at least I have some color to work with in post-processing where I can go ahead and darken down that top portion to match up with the front of the leaf. The image on the left, because it's just gone to white, I don't have any color to work with to darken it down. So again, very important having this tool, this diffuser. Now, on sunny days, I'm going to diffuse my subject 100% of the time. I never let the sunlight hit my subject. And there's three reasons why I do that. One is because it can alter the color of the subject, can actually change the color of the subject depending on time of day, if it's early morning light, midday light. It can create shadows in areas that I might not want shadows, all right? And it can also wash out colors. So the image on the left is a sumac branch. That's early morning sunlight directly hitting that sumac branch, and it's created a alternate color there. It's not the green it's supposed to be. It's more of a yellowish green. There's also some nothing major, minor shadow effect in here. Sometimes you're shooting subjects where you get a lot of shadow effect. This one's not bad, a little bit of shadow. But I've lost the color that it's supposed to be. It's supposed to be the green that you see over on the right side after I've diffused it. So once I put the diffuser between the subject and the sunlight and block the sun, now the image on the right side is the natural green of those leaves. It brings the color back to the natural green once I diffuse it. So again, sunlight, I'm losing colors. I'm creating shadows. If you notice on the right side, those shadows have been eliminated here. All right. So we got our color back. Anytime you would lose any washed out colors, you'd bring that back. Very important. So that's why on sunny days, I diffuse 100% of the time. I never let the sunlight directly hit my subjects. Now, there are occasions when I use sunlight for backlighting for special effect. That's totally different, but just for general shooting and everything, I'm gonna diffuse on sunny days 100% of the time. And then I'll make sure I have my diffuser with me on cloudy days, because sometimes you'll get some washout on colors even on a cloudy day. You're going to use your diffuser indoors too. Sometimes there are going to be times when you're shooting indoors, and if the light's at the right angle to the subject, you might get some little hot spots or white spots on your subject. So your diffuser can come in handy even indoors. You're wondering, do I have to hold this diffuser all the time? You could. A lot of times I just hold my diffuser when I'm shooting, or you could have an assistant, which is this Plamp. P-L-A-M-P, Plamp, made by Wimberly. And you can see on the left side, there's a large clamp. It's got a flexible tubing. On the other side, there's another clamp. Now, what you can do is if you're shooting in really close to your subject, I'm shooting this little butterfly weed right here. You could attach it onto your tripod leg. And then on the other end, you can see my diffuser is attached on the other end. And so you could use it on your tripod leg. But let's say they're using a 180 macro lens and you're 3 feet away from that. Well, if you attach it to your tripod leg, that flexible tubing is not long enough to reach out and hold your diffuser over your flower. So what Wimberly did is they came up with a stake system. And what it is, it's a plastic hollow tube with a screwdriver inserted into that tube. And then when you want to make it into a stake, you pull out the screwdriver, you reverse it, stick the handle into the tube, and you stake it into the ground next to your subject. Then you can go ahead and attach your Plamp onto the stake, position your diffuser over your subject, and then you can maneuver your camera any place you want. If you want to move it farther back, move it to the side, and then that'll be your assistant holding your diffuser for you. They also show on their website that you can clamp it onto a stem of a flower. Let's say it's got a little slight wind one morning, you're out there shooting and you want to stop that flower from swaying. You can actually stake your stake next to the flower and then clamp onto the stem of the flower to stop it from moving. Now there is foam inside that clamp so that when you clamp it on the stem, it won't do any damage to the stem of the flower. Camera settings, my ISO is set at 2000 on both cameras. Both my cameras can shoot higher than that, but I find 2000 for what I do works just fine. These newer cameras, it's unbelievable how high you can go on these ISOs. But 2000 gives me nice clean images with no issues, and it gives me a faster shutter speed when I'm shooting at the high f-stops, which I'll talk about in a little bit. Now, you can set your camera up to shoot manual so that you would adjust the shutter speed, and also you would adjust the aperture, the f-stops, or you could set your camera for aperture priority, which all you would have to do is set your f-stop, and the camera would take over and set the exposure. So I actually do both ways. On my DSLR, I tend to shoot manual, and on my new Fuji, which I use pretty much 100% of the time now, the mirrorless camera, I actually have it set up just for aperture priority, and it takes over and takes care of my shutter speed, and I just have to set my f-stop. Now, when I first started, because I live in the north just like you all, and winter time comes and we're not outside shooting, I would do a lot of shooting indoors. You're wondering why I'm shooting on my stairway. Well, that's because that is a 2-story high foyer, the front of my house, and it has a massive big window at the top, second level of the house, and it floods that stairway with beautiful natural light. It is the brightest place in my home. So that is the best place to shoot because I like shooting with the natural light. Problem is when you're shooting in your home is, in this case, I wouldn't want stairs as the background behind my flowers, right? So I had to put some kind of a background behind there to block out the stairs. And in the beginning, I was using white backgrounds and fleece or felt materials for backgrounds. And the problem was I got tired of seeing black and white backgrounds, and I never thought it looked natural. It looked too artsy. And I wanted my images to look more like when I shot things out in the field with, grass backgrounds and green backgrounds and things like that. So what I did was I started to create my own backgrounds that I would use. And as you can see, there's one background right there that's set up behind that flower. And this is how you do it. Now, if you have a macro lens, this tends to work better with the macro lens than it does with the zoom lens. It can kind of work with the zoom lens, but the macro lens does it much, much better for blurring. Now, I've got my tripod set up, got my 90mm Tamron, and I've just focused on some grass like this you see here, and I've got it in focus. Now, when we're manually focusing with our lens, if we get that subject in focus and we start to move that focusing ring a little bit to the left, a little bit to the right, all right, that subject starts to go soft and out of focus. So what you want to do is take your focusing ring and rotate it, a couple turns to the left, and then go the opposite direction past the focus point, couple turns to the right. Now with my 90mm Tamron, it seems works the best when I turn the ring to the right side. And you can turn the ring, and as you're turning it, you'll see the subject start to go out of focus. And you'll get to a point where the subject will turn into a solid color. It's completely out of focus. Now, once I get it to that solid color, I go ahead and photograph it, and I end up with that right there. So that grass that you saw right there with the lens turned completely out of focus gives me that solid color. And that's a color that I would get many times when I used to shoot with subjects way off in the background and blur them out. So that's a natural color in nature that I can use indoors. Now, let's say that you look at that solid color and you think, you know what, I'd like to have a little bit of texture in there, maybe a little blotchiness. Well, this is a different subject. When I take it out of focus, I just don't take it to a solid color. I leave a little bit of the texture in there. So when you're taking it out of focus, you'll see it starts to go, out of focus, and you'll see some details. And as you keep turning, you'll see a little less details, a little less details. So you can stop it anywhere you want and create different textures in that image. Now, if you're shooting like with some yellow flowers in your scene, you'll get more of a yellowish green. If you're shooting some pinks, you'll get pinks in your greens. And then I go to botanical gardens where I shoot flowers out of focus, and I get all types of different shades of colors. And so that's something that you can do. When you go into botanical gardens, it's nice because they have tons and tons of big plots of flowers that you can just take them out of focus and create your own backgrounds. Now, if you don't want to go through all that and create your own backgrounds out in the field, you can actually buy these books of backgrounds that are being sold in hobby stores like Hobby Lobby, Michael's Crafts, Joann Fabrics. These are actually made for scrapbook people that do scrapbooking. And they have, in this case, you'll see the one on the right says 58 sheets. So 58 backgrounds that they have in there, and all different creative type backgrounds. The one on the left side, you can see those are just solid color backgrounds, which would be kind of the same as what I showed you, the solid greens. And these are two backgrounds that came out of that one. And they're just kind of pastel-y sometimes. Sometimes they're a little more color. Sometimes they have a little more details, a little less details. So very nice little backgrounds that you can use if you don't want to make your own. Another option would be flypapertextures.com. They sell this groups of backgrounds that they create. And in this case, I think there's 50 some backgrounds, and they charge you like $40, and they send you the files. You download the files into your computer. And what these were designed to do was, in your post-processing, say you're using Photoshop, you would take one of these filters and overlay it on top of your image. And then you would go in there and erase the filter off of the subject. And then that would be your background behind the subject. That's what they were really designed to do. But what I realized is that, hey, I've got these filters and I can download them, and then I can print them out and use these as backgrounds behind my subjects when I'm shooting. So these are really, really nice, different, all types that you can see here, different types of little abstract-y type filters that you can buy. Now, you'll want to print these on a matte paper. You don't want to use any glossy papers or lusters or semi-gloss. You don't want any sheen on there, because if you're using it, indoors or outdoors, if it's angled the right angle with the light, it can actually have kind of a washed out look on it, or a kind of a glare on it. So you want to use a matte paper that has no sheen to it when you print it. Or if you're having someone else print it, hopefully they'll have matte paper, they'll print it for you. You'll want to put some kind of a backing on these, because you don't want to have this flimsy little print that's going to be hard to handle and hard to position when you put it behind your subject. You need some kind of a backing on that print. So you can use matte board, which is what we use for matting our images when we frame them. You can use foam core, which is the material they use behind the print when we frame them, or cardboard, any type of a stiff material that you can attach these prints onto to stiffen them up. Now, what you want to do is get carpet tape. And the reason why you want carpet tape, because there is an adhesive on both sides of the tape. All right. So it's adhesive on both sides of the tape. And so when you lay your background down on the ground, you'll cut some of these strips of the carpet tape and you'll stick it onto the background. As you can see, I use 4 strips across mine. And then you'll have on this side, you'll have the paper that you can peel off, and that'll expose the adhesive on this side. And then you can go ahead and lay your print right on top of that backboard, and it'll hold really, really well. Now, I will tell you this, that carpet tape is super, super sticky. If you accidentally lay your print there and it's not the right angle, or it's off a little bit or bubbled, you will ruin that print trying to get it off there, and you'll make a huge mess, because a lot of that print will stick onto that tape. It's real sticky, so you have to be very, very careful when you go to lay it on there, that you lay it on there perfectly flat. One of the problems that we deal with in macro photography is clutter. It is a huge problem. Go into botanical gardens, go in backyard gardens, go out into the fields where we shoot at the parks and that, and we're shooting subjects that have tons of clutter behind those subjects. This is a U-pick flower farm north of my home where I live, and they let me come out there and photograph the flowers in rows and rows of beautiful flowers, and they have acreage of sunflowers and all this great stuff to shoot. So I go out there and shoot the flowers. Now, as you can see in those rows of flowers behind me, if I shoot any one of those flowers, there is a lot of clutter right directly behind those flowers. So what I do is I bring my backgrounds that I just showed you how to make, that we're using indoors when we're indoors, I bring them with me out into the field now. I used to teach people how to try to get images shot with, blurring out backgrounds naturally. I don't do that anymore because it's so much easier doing it this way here. So now I go out there and it's a cure for my clutter. I don't have to worry about clutter no matter where I shoot. I just put a background behind my subject. I set up my camera. I've got my self timer on my camera set for 10 seconds, gives me time to go over there and put the background behind it. And I get that right there. So without that background behind it, there would be a messy background behind it. And the backgrounds are as important as the main subject. If you mess up the background, then it just ruins the whole image. So now I also, that background is a solid color that I was using, but I added another background in my post-processing in Smart Photo Editor that created an extra little texture around on the background there. Here I'm in my backyard. I'm shooting a fern. There's a brand new fern that just popped up in the spring. Put my background behind it, and I can get that all in focus and get a nice clean background. Now, when I shoot these with these backgrounds behind them, I'm shooting at the highest f-stop of my lens. I shot this past summer. I was in Chicago Botanical Garden in June. Then I went up to Madeline Island, and then I went over to Dow Gardens in Michigan and shot all 3 locations, never changed my f-stop, shot the whole time at f32. And the reason being is I want everything in focus. I like that style, all in focus. These are lily of the valleys. Now here's a situation you can see where I'm using my plamp. Remember the plamp that I showed you how to use for your diffuser? Now you're using the plamp to hold your background behind your subject. So it's kind of dual purpose. You can use it for your diffuser, and you can also use it for your backgrounds. You may want to get 2 of them. So that is the area I wanted to clean up on that image with the lily of the valleys, just that little area up there. Otherwise, I would have a bunch of leaves and clutter in the background that you would see. So a lot of times I just hold the background with my hand behind the subject. Here I'm at Madeline Island. We teach a workshop there every year in June, and I'm the guy holding the diffuser and the background for this photographer. Now, these backgrounds don't have to be perfectly positioned and fill up the whole area behind it. The nice thing about these larger megapixel cameras that we have, my Fuji camera is 26 megapixels. I don't have to worry about perfectly framing the subject when I shoot it. I can just shoot a larger area like you see here, and then crop out what I want in post-processing. Same with this here, loop-in up on Madeline Island. I can just stick my background behind it and then crop out what I want in post-processing. Another loop-in with some nice little leaves. Crop it out. These are cup plant flowers. So I don't have to get real fussy on the framing. Now, print sizes, because you're probably wondering, well, what size do I use now? Some of those images you saw had larger prints, and that's because on Madeline Island, where they have the lupin, those are very tall flowers. So I have a 13 by 19 inch print for those larger flowers. But most of the time I'm shooting smaller flowers at the parks near me. And so I only need an 8.5 by 11. Most of your backpacks nowadays are being sold where they have an opening, like you see where I'm putting this background into. They have an opening. That opening is actually designed for a laptop or a notebook to be slid into there, but I found that it works great for putting my backgrounds in there. So I carry 3 or 4 different backgrounds, slide them into that opening. But for my small backpack that I carry, 8.5 by 11 is the only size that I can use in it. Now, if you have a bigger backpack, you could go to bigger sizes. If I have to use the larger 13 by 19s, I have to carry them out there with me. One lady in one of my workshops said she actually made a special fabric bag that she sewed together and put a handle on it, and so she could carry larger ones when she goes out. Now you're all wondering, Mike, you're shooting at f32, you're going to get diffraction. And most people over the years that been in camera clubs will always hear people say never shoot over f16. That's pretty much your limit. You want to go at f16, and if you can shoot even less, f8, f11s, that's even better because least diffraction happens at those f8s, f11. But I always say never shoot over f16. The problem is that in macro photography, we don't get a lot of depth of field in those f8s and f11s. So that is an issue for us. In order to get more in focus, we have to go to the larger f-stops. Now, for landscape wildlife photographers, they shoot a lot of times at f8s and f11s, and they get tremendous amounts of depth of field if they're shooting a mountain that's 5 miles away. But for macro, when we move in really, really close to our subject, our depth of field shrinks down to very, very little. Now, with the aperture inside our lens, this is a good example of how that works, obviously. Most people don't have a 1.4 f2. Most people start at a 2.8 if it's a standard type lens. Now, a 2.8, you'll see the aperture inside is what is a lot of people at 2.8 would call that wide open because it's as big as it can get at a 2.8 if that's what your lens is. But you'll see up here in the top, you'll get the little guy in focus, but you'll get a lot of the background will be out of focus. Now, as we go to the f4 and the f5.6 and the f8, now the aperture is shrinking down to a smaller and smaller opening. And as it gets smaller, it starts to bring more depth of field, more in focus until we get up to the 32. And you got the smallest, tightest aperture, but you get everything in focus from front to back, side to side, top to bottom. So that's where I shoot because I want everything in focus. I want maximum depth of field. Now, one of the problems with shooting at those small f-stop, like this little guy right here, is that when you're shooting at f32, the light from your subject is now entering into this large lens, and the light is traveling down that lens. And as it gets to this little aperture opening, the light is now trying to squeeze through that tiny opening. And as it's squeezing through that little opening, the light tends to have some movement and shifting. And so that when it image hits your sensor, it causes a softness in the details. In other words, the image coming out of your camera is not going to be very sharp. I mean, it's not going to be blurry, but it'll be soft. It'll have some softness in the details. It won't be really sharp. So that's why people always tell you don't shoot over f/16, because you're going to get this diffraction. You get softness in your images, and your image is going to come out where you're going to have a problem with sharpness. All right. Now, the great thing about digital photography, and I learned this in 2004 when I started out with Photoshop Elements, is that they have a sharpening program in these software programs. And Photoshop, it's called Unsharp Mask, and I used Unsharp Mask in the beginning when I was using Elements. And then Nix Software came along. They had a Sharpener Pro. Topaz has Sharpen AI now. And I use Smart Photo Editor for all my processing the last 5 years, and they have sharpening filters in their system. And guess what sharpening programs are made for? Yeah, sharpening your images. So if your images are coming out a little on the soft side, you have a tool to correct that softness. You have these sharpening programs. And just like you use all the other tools that are in the software programs, you adjust your exposures with these programs, you adjust your contrast, you adjust the colors in your images, you do all kinds of adjusting, and you have a sharpening tool to adjust the softness that I get at the f/32. So it is not an issue. This is a sunflower I shot at that flower farm that I showed you earlier, a picture of me at the flower farm. If you look at all the fine detail throughout the center of here, which has this beautiful texture detail, it's not real sharp. There is some softness happening in there. Same with the petals. The details that are in the petals are soft as well. And that is the diffraction that I get from shooting at f/32. Now, what I do with this image is take it in my Smart Photo Editor, and I'll crop it, and I might alter the colors a little bit, and then I'll sharpen it, and I'll end up with that right there. So now you can see the sharpness and all the details of that center of that flower, and all the lines that are in the petals are all sharp now. So it's very easy to take an image that has some softness from the diffraction at f/32 and then just sharpen it. Same with this little sunflower here. It's just starting to open up. I cropped it, sharpened it, and plenty of details in there. So again, you don't have to worry about that diffraction, because you're going to be able to correct that. Now, of course, sharpening is a personal preference, and you can take it to whatever level you want. If you don't want it super sharp, I tend to like it really sharp. So I probably take it to a little higher level of sharpness, but you don't have to. You can leave a little softer. But look at the image on the left, how soft that it looks. And again, that was f/32, and that's right out of the camera. And then the image on the right, you see all that nice sharp details within there. And I hear this all the time from people when I post on Facebook. They go, God, your images are very sharp. How do you do that? It's the sharpening tools. This guy here is an ornamental cabbage, and it happened to have this little seed head. It was a dewy morning with all kinds of dew all over it. And look at how it brought that detail out on that dew. All right, so why I use high f-stop numbers is because of the shallow depth of field that we work with when we're doing macro in really close. And I'm going to set up this ruler here on a table. You can see I'm using a 90mm macro. The front of the lens is not parallel, which a lot of times we try to get parallel to subjects, right? But sometimes you can't get parallel. Maybe you're at an angle to a subject and you can't get in a parallel position. So you have to learn how to shoot on bad angles, because your depth of field is going to be a lot deeper when you're shooting on an angle like that rather than being parallel. When I shoot at the 2.8 smallest f-stop, all I'm going to get in focus is one tiny eighth of an inch. Take a ruler out and look at an eighth of an inch. It's very small, is in focus at 2.8. Even the line that is right to the upper part and the lower part is already starting to go out of focus in just that little bit, 30 seconds of an inch. So we don't get a lot of depth of field when we get in close, but at f/32, you can see on the right side, I can get everything in focus. Now, on that same table, I put a peacock feather, and I have my camera set up the exact same way on an angle to that peacock feather. Now, people tell you, shoot at f/8. It's going to get the least amount of diffraction, which it does. It gives you a much sharper image coming out of the camera at f/8 than it does f/32. But look what I get for depth of field, very little. All I get is a little tiny bit of focus there. Even at f22, I can't get it all in focus even at f22. Look at that. Still not sharp. But at the f32, I can get it all in focus. So that's why I shoot at f32, because even at f22, which you think is still pretty high f-stop, there may be some depth in a subject I'm shooting that I might not get it all in focus. But f32, I know it's maximum going to get it all in focus. Variable f-stops. Now, this is another thing you got to watch out for. Most lenses today have what are called variable f-stops. In other words, your lens may say it stops at f32. On my macro lens, if I'm shooting at a distance away from a subject, like I am with this milkweed, and I'm shooting this milkweed right here, it may go to f32 and stop. But if I move in closer on this subject, see how much closer I am? It might go to f45. And if I get in real close, it'll end up at f54. So it's a variable lens, and that's also on the low end too. Sometimes my macro lens says it's a 2.8, but most of the time I'm shooting it's a 4.5 when I get in really close to the subject. So it could be a f32 at a distance away from the subject, and as you get in closer, it could be 45 and it could be 54. Now on my zoom lenses, they don't go much higher than the 32. They go 32 and it goes about 36 when I get in real close, and maybe a little higher, but I can pretty much do what I need to do by just leaving it set at the 32, and it pretty much will get everything in focus most of the time. If your lens only goes to 22, then that's your highest f-stop. That is your smallest aperture inside your lens. So you shoot at your 22. Here's an interesting book. You may want to buy this book. You all know of Ansel Adams, the most famous of all photographers. Ansel Adams, everybody, even if you're not a photographer, people know who Ansel Adams is. He has gallery showings all over the country all the time in big galleries of his images, and very, very, very famous. Everybody knows who he is. Now, another photographer of that same time frame that Adams was around was Edward Weston, another well-known photographer of that time frame. Now, in the 1940s, I believe it was, Ansel and Edward Weston started a camera club in California, and there was, I think, 7 other photographers that were in that initial camera club. And what they called the camera club name was Group F64. And the reason why they called it Group F64, because all these photographers within that camera club were shooting at F64 because they wanted maximum depth of field out of their lenses, because their style of shooting was everything in focus, front to back, side to side, top to bottom. So all these photographers were shooting at the F64, and that's why the camera club was called Group F64. And you can buy this book on Amazon. That's where I bought my copy. I read about it somewhere. I bought the book, read it. It's very interesting learning about how that all came about and how that started. But yeah, Ansel Adams and these other famous photographers shooting at F64, high f-stop numbers. So you don't need to focus that, because you're all out there thinking, well, Mike, you don't need to shoot at F32, and you can shoot and focus stack it. Well, you don't need to. If I can get it all in focus with one shot at F32, why would I bother with focus stacking? Some problems with focus stacking. All right. Now let's say that I'm going to shoot this Gerber daisy and I'm in really close, so I'm not getting a lot of depth of field. And I want to focus stack this because I want to blur out the stairs in the background. And let's say I'm going to shoot it at 4.5, small f-stop number, because I'm not going to get much depth of field at 4.5. Now, first of all, I got to calculate on that flower, how deep is that flower from the front to the back? Because I'm going to shoot throughout that flower, multiple images shooting from front to back. I have to figure out that flower's 3 inches deep, 3 inches from front to back. Now, there's an app that you can, I've never seen the app, but I've heard about it. There's an app that you can get to download onto your phone, and it'll actually tell you that if you are whatever distance you are away from the flower you're shooting, like here, I'm probably 8 inches away. So I'd say I'm 8 inches away from the flower, and I'm going to choose 4.5 as my f-stop, how much depth of field I'm going to get. And it'll tell you, it'll calculate at how close you are and the choice of f-stop. You're going to get 1/4 of an inch in focus. And you saw on that ruler, I only got 1/8 of an inch. So let's say we get 1/4 of an inch that we're going to get at that closeness to that flower at 4.5. And the reason why we're shooting 4.5 is because we need to blur out that background. All right, so now I've got to shoot 12 shots because that flower is 3 inches and I'm only going to get 1/4 inch in focus on every one of the shots. So I have to shoot 12 different shots throughout that flower. And I got to make sure I'm pretty precise as I make the changes. So I'm going to start out in the very front, focus on the very tips here. And I'm going to get my first shot 1/4 inch in focus. Then I'm going to focus in a little bit closer and get another 1/4 inch, another 1/4 inch until I go through 12 quarters. All right, to get that whole flower in focus. Now I take those 12 images, I got to run them through a software program. Maybe you're using Helicon Focus, which is what I used years ago when I first tried it. Zareen Stacker or even Photoshop now will combine the images for you. So they'll take those 12 images, look at each image, pull out the sharpest part, and put them all together so that it makes a completely sharp flower from front to back. So you're going to go through all that trouble, shooting 12 images, calculating all that, and then merging them into this program when I can get that same exact flower in focus with one f-stop. And I don't worry about the background blurring it out because I'll put my own background behind it. It's so much easier and so much simpler. It's a waste of time focus stacking. All right. So again, I don't understand why anybody would use that system when you can put a background behind it to avoid the clutter and shoot with one f-stop. Now, let's say you want to do soft focus, the opposite of what I'm teaching you, because I like everything in focus, but some people like to do soft focus. Now, instead of going to the f22 or f32 where you get the small aperture, now we're shooting the f4s or 2.8, or now we have a wide open aperture, and that gives us that shallow depth of field like you saw on that ruler, 1/8 of an inch. All right. Now, a lot of people will use the lens baby to create that soft, soft focus flower photography. But you can actually get the same exact look by just using your macro lens shot at 2.8, smallest aperture opening, or the smallest f-stop number. So this is shot with the lens baby. Gives me a lot of autofocus softness, and a lot of people like that style. There's some photographers that are really dedicated to doing this on a full-time basis, and they make a good living teaching people how to do it. And so it is a popular style amongst macro photographers. Now, this was a shot, looks similar to the other one, which is a lot out of focus, very little in focus. It was shot with a macro lens, not a lot of lens baby. So you can get the same effect with your traditional macro lens by just shooting at the smallest f-stop. Now, when I shoot this style, I always try to place my focus in the foreground. So I focused on this petal right here. And then at the 2.8, it softens into the flower and into the background. So what I do, back to this shot again, I focus on the tip, the very edge of the flower, the front edge of the flower, the tips, right on the tips of the petal that are closest to the front of my lens. And that's where I place my focus. And then at the small f-stop, you'll get just those little tips in focus, and then it'll blur into the background, into the flower. This is a blue poppy shot at the Longwood Gardens in Philadelphia, or outside of Philadelphia. And this is the edge of the petal that is closest to the front of my lens. And so I place my focus right there, and then you get this nice softness that goes into the petals and then blurs out in the background there. Now, the reason why I always focus on the foreground is because when someone looks at your image, they want to see something in focus. Their eye is searching on, looking for something in focus. And if it's in the foreground, it's easy to spot right away. You can see it right away. But let's say I readjusted my focus to pull in the pistils or the stamens or whatever is inside here. Look what happens to my foreground. It turns into a big blob of blur if I focus into the center of the flower here. So that's why I always focus in the foreground, because I want the foreground in focus first and then let it soften into the flower and then blur out the backgrounds. Same with this little orchid right here. Just focus on this little guy right here, and then let the softness of the 2.8 soften the flower. Same with this here, closer to the front of my lens, this little point right here in focus. The rest of it softens out. And this front here. I was shooting at Washington Oaks down in Florida. It's a little botanical garden, and I spotted this flower. And again, I'm going to focus on this foreground here and end up with that right there. And then soften into the background. So you can do the same kind of effect as you get with Lens Baby. Lens Baby people will tell you, no, you can't, but I just showed you a whole bunch of images that look pretty similar to me. And you can do it just with your standard macro lens shooting at the smallest aperture or smallest f-stop. All right, gang, what about lighting? Because you're all there, what do you do for lighting? I use whatever natural light is available. That goes for outside and indoors. I don't use any flash systems. It's only strictly natural light. Occasionally, which is very, very, very rare, I might use a small LED light to light up a certain area within an image, but that's pretty rare. Most of the images you see on my website, if you see a lighting source, it looks like there's a special light, that is more than likely a light that I applied in post-processing, and it wasn't when I shot the image. But occasionally, but again, it's very rare that I might use a small LED light to add a little light into an area that's dark. But that's pretty rare. But always, I would use only natural light, and that goes outside or even in my home. I'm only using natural light. So, and that makes it simple. You don't have to worry about buying, flash systems and trying to figure out how to use them and getting the right lighting with the flash. All right, gang, that's pretty much how I do it. It's pretty simple. It's not that hard. I have this macro photo club that Jeff mentioned in the beginning. It has over 270 instructional videos, and it covers 4 categories. So it's about 100 and some videos of me out in the field actually photographing things. And then it has videos on post-processing, videos on equipment, and videos on composition. And we've got 2,800 members now from 28 countries. A lifetime membership is $99. You only have to pay it one time, and you're always a member. We have a Facebook group where there's about 1,500 of our members on the Facebook group, and they share images and post images and ask questions and things like that. If you're interested in joining this macro club, it's online. Just go to my website, tinylandscapes.com. And when you get to the website on the top, you'll see some links, and look for the one in the center that says Macro Photo Club, and click on that. It'll give you more information about the club and how to go ahead and sign up and pay. All right, Jeff.
Great.
All right.
Thank you, Mike.
I
I'll
will
post those links with the videos so that everybody can see them and click right to them if they like.
And I'd be more than happy to answer any questions if anybody has any questions that
Yep.
they want to ask.
Nothing's popped up so far. Anybody want to ask a question? Please go ahead and put it in the Q&A, and Mike will be glad to answer them.
If there's no questions, that means I covered everything so well.
You did a great job as usual. From all the times I've listened to you speak, it's always interesting. I've got a sheet full of notes here for new stuff I want to try, and I remember the old print stuff from the old days because you've been teaching to do the out of focus prints for a long time.
Yeah.
Can you repeat the extension grip? It's the Plamp.
Yes, the Plamp. PLAMP.
Yeah, and it's by Wimberly, right?
Yep, Wimberly, yep.
Yeah, I think that's what tripodhead.com, if I remember right. If you want to go right to their site.
Yeah, they run about $45 for the Plamp, and the stake is about $25. At least that's what it was a few years ago, I remember.
Yeah.
But it's a great tool. I mean, it really works well.
Yep.
And the diffusers, you can pick those up for under $15, the 12-inch. They're cheap.
Yeah.
I've had people say, well, can you use a polarizer? Polarizers will work some of the time, but not 100% of the time, because they have to be at the right angle of the light before they work properly. And so when I first started, I actually used some polarizers, and they worked sometimes, but there were times when it didn't work. But the diffuser works 100% of the time. So I gave up on the polarizers and just used the diffuser.
Okay, that answered a couple of the questions. Yeah, there are cameras that have focus stacking built in, but
that's right. Olympus.
Yeah, and even the Nikons have focus stacking built into it. So, but it's simpler to do his way
One
of
shot.
doing it. Let me tell you, one shot.
Yeah.
He-
I was out
Good.
with Lisa and Tom Kuchera. They're real big Olympus people, and they actually on Madeline I last year, one of our instructors couldn't make it, so Tom and Lisa came up and they filled in, and we were out shooting before the workshop started, and it was a little bit breezy on that day, and so Tom, they're real big on focus stacking within the camera, and it does a good job. I mean, it works well and it's pretty quick. But he was going to shoot a bug on a leaf or something. He goes, well, he said, I can't really do a focus stack on this because it's a little windy. But I could, with a high, 2000 ISO, I could shoot that bug with one shot. But even with
Yeah.
his focus stack in camera, he said, it's a little too windy to use the focus stack in the camera. So to me, it just seems to make so much more sense shooting one image.
No, I certainly like that way, and I do that more because I learned that from you a long time ago. So
Yeah. Now you do
um,
have to understand that you do get diffraction. I don't, I
Yep.
admit that you're going to get that, but we have the tools to correct it where, it can be fixed just like we fix all kinds of other things in post-processing that go wrong.
Yep, that's why I use Nick Color Effects with their detail enhancer, which
Yes.
does a lot of that same stuff.
Yeah, that works really good.
I got a couple here. They're popping in. Extension tubes versus 2x extenders. Any thoughts on that matter?
Well, you don't really need them nowadays unless you're going to go into higher magnification than 1:1. A macro lens will get you into 7/8 of an inch by 1 3/8. I mean, I don't know, not many people shooting smaller than that, but if you needed to, you could use extension tubes, or they have, like Nisi has those screw-on filters on the front of the lens, but that'll take you to 2:1 magnification. But even, like I said, I don't even use my macro lenses anymore because what I shoot is larger areas than 1.5 by 2.5 inches, which it'll get me in that tight. And then nowadays with these large megapixel cameras, I shoot larger areas and just crop out small areas out of it, and it looks like I shot it with a macro lens at 1:1.
Sure.
So, I mean,
Sure.
we have so many benefits that we have compared to what we, the way you used to have to do it in years ago. It's so much simpler nowadays.
Yeah. Have you had any success in lens reversal mounts?
Well,
Boy,
that would
I
take
haven't
you
seen
into
those in a long time.
yeah, I tried that years ago, and it goes into a very high magnification when you reverse that lens. And I just don't shoot in that small of an area. And you think the depth of field is small shooting with a regular macro lens? Oh my God. The
Yeah.
depth of field is like fractions when you get into reversing those lenses and shooting, if you're getting into 3:1, 4:1, 5:1 magnifications, I mean, God, the depth of field, that's really where you have to use focus stacking. Because
Yeah.
when you're shooting that
Yeah.
high magnification, you cannot get enough depth of field. Even the highest f-stop won't get it. So that's where your focus stacking comes in, is when you're shooting at 3:1 and 4:1 and 5:1. You pretty much have to focus stack to get everything in focus, if that's what you're trying to do.
Yeah. Yeah. And focus stacking, the biggest problem is everything's got to be not moving at all.
Well,
And if you get any movement,
that's the
it's a
other big
problem.
issue, is that if you're out there in the daytime, I'm sure where you guys are, you're same as me, it's windy every day. There's
Yep.
going to be some wind out there every day. And you can't go out there and shoot 10, 12 images of anything that's going to stay steady for that long of a period of time to get through all
Yeah.
those shots. So that is a huge issue, obviously, is sometimes it's hard to get a shot if it's windy with one shot. That's why we're shooting at 2000 ISO.
Yeah.
And luckily we have cameras that'll produce images that will shoot that high f-stop and give me a fast shutter speed. I mean, my f32s are coming out at a 30th of a second, 60th of a second. I mean, I'm getting fast shutter speeds at f32 even on a cloudy day. But I'm
Sure.
also, again, 2000 ISO. And so that's been a big benefit, is getting into, you remember back in the old days when I got my first digital camera, an S2, Fuji S2 in 2004, you couldn't even shoot 400 ISO without getting a whole bunch of grain in there. I mean, you had to stay at the 100 to get the cleanest images out of that, but that's not the case anymore.
No, these cameras, these mirrorless cameras are doing just remarkable job.
Yeah, I'm real happy with mine.
Yeah. Yeah. Do you pre-vision on what processing you will do when you make the photo?
No, when I shoot it, I'm looking at the subject matter and composition, and that's all I'm concerned with at that point. But when I go into my post processing, it can get really creative.
Yeah.
I mean, I've got images where I've applied filters on top of filters on top of filters and come out with some pretty bizarre looking things. And then some of my images are just pretty standard, just sharpened them, you know. But a lot of
Okay.
them I'm doing lately, I'm doing in Smart Photo Editor. I'm using all their 8,000 creative filters, and I'm doing all kinds of more artsy type images than I used to do. And that's kind of the style I've kind of merged into. And that might only last for a while, and I'll just go back to doing just standard images. But I'm having a lot of fun with those filters. So, and I have no idea what's going to happen to that image until I start applying filters on top of it. And so I don't have any preconceived, like what am I going to do with this? It's going to be just shoot it, find a composition, compose it, shoot it, and then worry about when I get home and get on the computer, and the filters are going to tell me what is going to work or not work for me.
Great. You like the high pass filter for sharpening in Photoshop?
Never used it. I've heard of
okay.
it, and I know there are people that do use it. I've seen there's like a
Yeah.
method that some people use to use that. And I always, when I use elements, because I never use full-blown Photoshop, I only use elements, and I use the unsharp mask. And that's the only system that I used for
Right.
many, many years. And then, of course, when all these other companies came out with sharpening programs, and I merged into some of those others, and then with Smart Photo Editor, which is what I've used for the last 5 years, they have filters in there, that you can apply different levels of sharpening to an image with the filters. And so that's what I use 100% of the time now, is the filters in Smart Photo Editor. That Smart Photo Editor, if you buy it as a standalone program, costs a lousy $29. It's cheap.
Yeah.
Yeah. And I'm getting some
Yeah.
amazing looking images from a $29 program.
Wow. Yeah. No, the high pass filter, that's sort of an old way of sharpening in Photoshop. You really don't do that too much anymore, but
Yeah, I remember
I'd
reading
certainly,
about it years ago.
yeah.
Landscape photographers, I remember had a little tutorials and stuff. They talked about doing that. Yeah.
It worked real nice when you needed to do certain sharpening, and you could do spot sharpening, which was sort of
Mhm.
nice with it, because you could mask out parts of it if you wanted to. But
Yeah.
these days you have so many between Nick and Topaz and
Yeah.
all the other ones for sharpening. I would do that first before I would go back to the old high pass.
Yeah, and I
filter.
haven't used it, but I've had people swear by the new Topaz Sharpen AI, which is the artificial intelligence, that's supposed to be built into it. And I've heard people say it's fantastic. I have not used it, so I don't know, because I'm happy with what I get out of my Smart Photo Editor. So I don't see
Sure.
any need to buy that program when I'm happy with what I have. But I've had people say they love that program. It sharpens really well, and it's working great.
Okay. Have you seen the Olympus 90mm macro?
Um,
Supposedly a dual purpose lens.
I believe I did see it. Tom and Lisa Kuchera, who were at that workshop I was at, they are big sponsored by Olympus and that, and I believe they had one there. As far as I know, I have never seen a macro lens that didn't produce really good images. All the brands, all of the macro lenses have always been good. Now in zoom lenses, when you would have these, what they call kit zoom lenses, that you would get a cheap lens when you buy a camera body. And then you'd have the more higher end professional type zoom lenses. I never saw that to happen in macro lenses. They were all really good. I even had one lady in my workshop had a Tacina 100mm macro lens, and it produced really great images. So as far as the macro lenses go, I think that everything that's produced in macro lenses that I've seen have all done really, really good work. So I wouldn't hesitate to buy any macro lens from any company.
And again, it's the Smart Photo Editor is
Yeah.
the editor that you're using for processing
Yeah.
your
If you look it up
so-
on like a Google search, just type in Smart Photo Editor, you might have to go down a few for whatever ring. There's a bunch of links you got to go down, and then there's a company called Anthroponics I think it's called Anthropodics, is actually the name of the company that produced Smart Photo Editor. And they have other landscape programs and different programs that they offer. But the Smart Photo Editor that I use is in this Anthropodics, I think it's called. So
Yeah.
when you go down, but if you do a Google search, you'll eventually find it there.
And if I can dig it up again, I know about that editor and I've used some of their products, so I'll put it in the link with the video so people can see it later on.
Yeah, the company's out of England.
Yeah. Yeah. And
But
I
yeah,
think they just
$29 for a
updated it or
standalone. Now you can get it as a plugin to Photoshop, but it's $49. So they must have to pay something to Photoshop to plug into their system.
Yeah.
But $29, I mean, geez, even if you buy it and don't like it, you're not out a lot of money. But they also have a free trial. So you can download it as a free trial and play with it. And if you do, like any new program, you're going to have, problems to navigate. It's actually really simple once you understand it. You can go onto YouTube. There's videos. There's all kinds of videos on how to use it. And in my macro photo club, I've got eight different videos on that cover Smart Photo Editor in my macro club.
Okay. Do you enter competitions?
Not
with your
anymore.
images?
When I
Okay.
first started out in like 2004, 2005, 2006, I entered quite a few contests and was fortunate to win some of them. But I haven't entered any contests in, that's got to be 15 years now. Doesn't
Yeah.
interest me.
Yeah. Yeah.
I will say
I
this
know.
though, it's much harder to win a contest today than it was way back when I started.
Yep. That's
There-
definitely true.
There are some really good photographers and really good images out there.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's
And
much tougher to win a contest today.
yeah, and we know because we're right in the middle of running our Wacko fall competition, and I know the entries that were in there from everybody, and there's a lot of tough competition in there.
Man.
A lot of great images from our
I know it.
photographers in our.
I know when I would speak in person at a lot of the camera clubs, they might be running, some images after the program, and you look at them, you go, man, these things are so good.
Yeah. No,
and everything, landscape, wildlife, macro, everything. There's great photographers out there.
yeah, we have a great group in this group. It's there's a lot of good photographers. So
Yeah.
and that's why we put on all this education, is so that everybody can learn a little bit more and try to expand their horizons. So,
Exactly.
anybody else have any questions? Otherwise, we'll let Mike go and we'll move into our next hour.
Yeah. So I can go rake leaves.
Yeah. I
Welcome
know that's
around and participate too, Mike. Don't feel like you got to run away.
Well, I was telling Jeff, I've got a pickleball this afternoon, and I got to get the leaves raked up and the grass cut before it rains starting tomorrow and the next day. And that's just the first batch of leaves. There'll be more coming down. I'll have to rake up again later. But I'm leaving also to go out down to Old Car City on Wednesday. So again, I got to get some work done today. But that Old Car City workshop, I don't know if any of you know about it or you've been there. It's about 50 miles north of Atlanta, Georgia. It's in White, Georgia, and it started back, 100 years ago or something. It was started by Dean, who owns it now. His dad started it, and they just started putting these old cars into this field. Well, what happened over the years is all the pine trees and deciduous trees started to grow up around the trees. So you're literally in a wooded area with 4,500 cars. And there are pathways. There's pathways that you can walk on and get around. But what's so cool about it is all the pine needles that have built up on tops of the cars and the hoods and the leaves and stuff in the fall that come down. It's just an amazing place to photograph these old cars from some in the 50s and some 40s, and nothing 70s is about the newest vehicles that are in there. But people come from all over the world to shoot there. I was there doing a workshop one year, and there was 3 guys from Germany that were there, and I said, so are you guys like in town in Atlanta for some business or something? He goes, no, we come here to shoot at Old Car City, all the way from Germany. Really? You came here just to shoot at Old Car City? And I said, so how
Yeah.
do you find out about it in Germany? He says, well, other photographers have been here and they tell us about it. So we come here. And Dean has people from all over the world that come there to shoot. It sells no parts anymore. It's not for parts. It's just strictly for photographers and for people to come in and look at the old cars. It's really cool.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, it sounds neat. I've always wanted to get there and I haven't made it yet. And I want to one day, because it's definitely, from all the photos that I've seen from everybody, it looks like a great
Oh, it's a blast.
spot. So,
Yeah.
one quick question is, do you shoot JPEG or RAW?
Good question.
Yeah.
All my images are JPEG.
That's what I thought.
I always get some flack about that. Of course, everybody goes, why are you shooting JPEG? Well, because it works for me. I don't know what to tell you. It works. Yeah, JPEGs. I tried shooting RAW in the very beginning. The problem in 2004 with the digital camera is that you couldn't, 1 gig, get this, 1 gig card, SD, compact flash card, 1 gig, $250.
Yeah.
Well, you could only fit 35 raw files on there, and I could get 170 some JPEGs. So guess what I'm shooting?
Yeah.
I bought 1 card and I wasn't going to buy any more. So I would get 1 card, I'd fill up 170 some images and download them on my computer. But when I bought that camera, I was actually going to Yosemite. And I'm not going to go out into Yosemite in the park and shoot 35 raw files and say I'm done for the day.
Yeah.
So the JPEGs are what I shot. Well, I was, in 2005, I started entering in contests and was getting articles published in magazines, and these are JPEGs, and they're doing just fine. So now the other problem in 2004 is if you had a computer that only had a small hard drive on it, you didn't have external hard drives. Well, you'd fill it up in no time with large files. And then the processor on those, I only had like 1 gig of RAM on a computer back in those days, and you just couldn't process the images fast enough, the raw files and the TIFF files and that. So I stuck with JPEG, and I don't need to do it today. I mean, we have fast, computers and massive amounts of hard drives and that, so I don't have to, but it still works, and I still shoot JPEGs. Yeah.
Yeah. Hey, if it works, go with it.
Working for me. That's all I care about.
And I know Marty agrees with you because he shoots all JPEG.
I see him clapping there.
Yeah. I'm a RAW guy myself, but
I don't teach people that they should do it. I don't tell other people that what they should do with how they photograph. They ask me and I tell them this is what I do. That's all.
Yeah.
But I have, I don't go out there to tell people they should shoot JPEGs. You do what you got to do for what you do,
Yeah. And I tell people different things depending on what they need to do and all the equipment they have. So I'm not one way or the other. I just happen to shoot RAW most of the time.
Sure.
But,
and most people do. I mean, most photographers are shooting RAW. It's rare when you find those that are shooting JPEG. One of the workshops, the lady came up to me. She goes, "I'm so glad to hear you shoot JPEG because that's what I shoot, but I can't tell anybody in the camera club I do that."
Yeah. See, and I don't,
because they jump all over you. They get they criticize you.
Yeah, I go, if it works for you, that's fine. I have no problem either way.
Yeah.
I just happen to like the way I can process my JPEG or my RAWs.
Sure.
But if I'm needing something in a hurry, I'll shoot a JPEG.
Yeah. Now I will tell you this, Jeff. If I was a landscape photographer, I would be shooting RAW. And the reason being is because the dynamic range in a landscape image is so vast that you're going to have a bright sky and black pine trees, and it's just going to be a big issue. And so you need to go in there and have that extra file information for your exposure adjustments, right? I don't have any issue with exposure. My images come out of the camera perfectly exposed, and the subject matter has very little high dynamic range, if any, most of the time. So I don't have any issues with exposure adjustments. So for me, JPEGs were good, but now as a landscape photographer, wildlife photographer, I could see why you'd want to shoot raw files for that.
Yeah. And that's why you're using that diffuser. You're bringing that dynamic range into place just by using a diffuser.
And that's one of the great benefits of macros. We control the light.
Yeah. would it be fair that you might need to shoot raw more if you were doing more landscapes? Yeah, that's what we just said,
Yep.
where you can't control fog and mist and such.
Yep. Exactly.
So yeah, we pretty much just confirmed what he asked there.
Yeah. Oh, I would be a raw shooter if I was a landscape photographer.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. So all depends what you're shooting and how you're shooting.
Exactly.
Marty shoots a lot of action sports stuff, and that tends to work better as a JPEG.
Sure.
Stuff that's not moving like landscapes can work better as raw. And,
Yeah.
I'm all
Yeah,
over
everybody's
the place
different.
some days.
Everybody requires different equipment. It's like me. All my cameras, I always buy cameras that are $1,000 or less. And the reason I do that is because 90 or 60% of the people that come to my workshops are using cameras that are $1,000 or less bodies. And so if I'm using a $6,000 professional camera body, those people leave my workshop saying, well, Mike, your images look great because you got a $6,000 camera. I'm shooting the $1,000 cameras because I'm showing those people that you don't have to have a $6,000 camera to produce good quality images. Now, for some photographers, they might need that $6,000 camera, depending on what you do.
Yeah.
My camera is not going to shoot super high frames per second, or, it's not going to shoot maybe super high ISOs, but those more expensive cameras will do that. And so some people that need that feature will have to pay more money. But for what I do, I like to show people that you don't need an expensive camera to do macro photography.
No, and that's why I wanted to have you on today, was to show that, yeah, people can do this without spending an arm and a leg.
Exactly.
We probably have most of the equipment right now, and pick up a diffuser is not too difficult, and the clamps and some of those little things. And
now
I love
for the
your idea of the background printing.
Yeah.
And that.
For the diffuser, you'll probably have to go online because most of the local camera stores don't carry the 12-inch model. They tend to carry larger diffusers. So you might have to go online to one of the online stores to get the diffuser. They're harder to find in small camera stores locally. Yeah,
not a lot of places carry them, but
yep.
I know they're around because one year PSA at their big photo seminar, we gave away a whole bunch of the 12-inch ones. So.
Yeah. Well, Hunt's Photo used to be at all the PSA selling stuff. So Gary would always come in with 12-inch if I was there, because people would just go there and buy up all his 12-inch diffusers.
Yeah. Westcott makes a really nice 12-inch one if people are looking. At least they used to. If you shoot at ISO 2000, don't you get noise?
Not at all. Nope, not at all. When I got the D7500 Nikon, I had tested that to see how high I could shoot. I actually was shooting at 3200 and still getting clean images at 3200. And then when I got the Fuji, I actually contacted one of the reps at Fuji who came, we did a Zoom meeting and he helped me set up my camera and all that. And I asked him about the ISO and I says, how high can I go on the ISO before I start to get any issues with noise? He says, oh, you can go really high. I says, well, like 2000? He goes, oh yeah, no problem. I said, okay. So I that's where I set it at 2000. And I have no issues at all with noise in my images. And I said, these new cameras can do that. Still, some people are still stuck in the old days where they think they have to shoot at 100 ISO. And you don't need to.
Yeah. No,
not only that, Mike. I mean, the software cleans all that up too, just like you mentioned.
Right.
Using it for everything else. I mean, certainly it's going to clean up any noise we get.
Yeah, if you had it to shoot at a really high ISO and you started to see a little noise, you're right. There's software that'll fix it. So you don't have to worry about that.
Yeah. No, I just shot at the Botanical Gardens and it was an overcast day and I was shooting at 400 and 800 quite often, and no noise at all with my camera. But,
are you guys by that domes?
Yeah, we have the three domes for a while yet.
I shot there one time.
Yep, it's a neat place. Unfortunately, it's sort of coming apart at the
seams.
It is?
But okay. I know it's quite a few years ago when I was there, but it was nice.
Yeah.
But you have the Chicago Botanical Garden, which isn't too far from you guys.
No, it's only an hour and a half away. For me, it's an hour and a half away.
Yeah,
And
yeah.
gorgeous place to shoot.
Oh, yeah.
Even we just shot there a couple days ago, and it's the end of the season for it, but still was plenty of stuff to photograph for a couple hours.
Yeah, and you can go
Um,
into the greenhouses and shoot in there. There's plenty of stuff in there to shoot too.
Yeah, yeah. Do you use any physical filters on your macro lenses, skylight filters or anything?
Nothing.
You're not
No.
using polarizers. You just mentioned that. So.
No, I mean, you remember back in the film days, you tended to use some filters, but now, no, I don't use any filters.
Yeah. I still use the skylight for protection, but that's because I'm hiking out in the woods and I don't want to.
When your
I'd
lens
rather
falls
break
over.
my filter, but it's a good quality filter.
Yeah.
I get flack on that from people because I go, oh, well, you put a cheap filter on. No, you put a good quality clear filter on and to protect the front, and
Yeah.
you're okay. You don't want to put a cheap one on.
Yeah. Yeah.
But yeah.
All right.
No,
For all
looks
set.
like that's about it. Mike, thank you quite a bit. Great having you on. We'll probably bring you back one of these days. I know
Yeah, I've
Mike
got
will
other
be talking
programs.
to our Menominee Falls Camera Club. I forget what the topic's going to be when he talks to our club in a few months, sometime
Cool.
next year. But we appreciate it.
Thanks a
Thank
lot.
you.
All right. Thank you all. And thanks for those who attended.
Yeah.
Hope you got some good
thanks.
tips.
We had record number 68 people. So it's the
Awesome.
biggest one we've had at this meeting. So
Awesome. All right. That's awesome.
All right. Well,
All right.
great. Thank you, Mike. We'll
All
be
right.
talking
See y'all
to you.
later.
Yeah, we'll see you. So with that, I can bring anybody else in that might want to join the panel, and we can do some general Q&A for next half hour or so. And if you've got questions, pop them into the Q&A, and we'll go from there. Just raise your Zoom hand if you want to be brought in.
Kathy's had her Zoom hand up for quite a while, but she didn't want to come
Yep.
in the panel apparently. So I don't know. Kathy, if you have a question, just type it into the Q&A or the
Yeah.
chat.
So does anybody have any questions?
I couldn't type into the Q&A. Is that because I'm a panelist?
No, it should be open to everybody. According
I mean,
to,
I can see the questions, but I couldn't. I was trying to type it in, and that's why I used the chat instead of the.
oh,
Q&A.
okay, yeah, you might not be able. I'm not sure about Q&A actually.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
They got so many different rules these days, but I know that the chat was working, so we were watching both of them there.
Jeff,
Boy,
this is
hey
Tony.
Tony.
That talk I gave not only covered macro and whatever, but a whole bunch of stuff that I just learned a lot about lighting and focusing and stuff like that. I thought that was a very good talk.
Great. I'm glad you liked it. Mike has always done a super job on doing talks, and when I saw he was doing Zoom talks, I thought it'd be worthwhile bringing him in. And like I said, he will be talking to the Menominee Falls Camera Club on a different topic. Actually, how not to have to do focus stacking, I think is the topic that we're having him do. So that'll be a good one. I can't remember which month it's coming up, but people can let me know if they want to come and watch. We'll let anybody come and watch it at that meeting.
Yeah.
But
I've been to a couple of his workshops. He's a real personable guy. I even met him with a one-on-one shoot over in Minneapolis at a antique place, and that was a fun day with him. So he's a real personable guy. He very practical, down to earth type of photographer. I think came across. I've been following for years. So
yeah, I knew him when he used to present at SwimSea, Southwest Michigan Camera Club Council, when they used to
Yep.
hold their big weekend thing. That's where I met him, and then Wacko had him here for a seminar and workshop where we did, I think, tabletop stuff or something. Can't quite remember because that was a long time ago. Jane Hurst is asking, does anyone have suggestions to walking on wet leaves? Do you think the spikes you use for snow and ice would work? Yeah, I suppose that is a little slippery. I don't know, spikes might do the trick.
They might also clog up and make it worse.
Yeah. Maybe
Just
some of the softer.
Just be careful.
Yeah. Yeah. That's the only trouble. Wet leaves and rocks are nasty this time of year.
One of the tricks for walking on wet stuff, take shorter strides so you maintain a center of balance.
Or going
Yeah.
barefoot.
Barefoot. Oh, that just sounds painful. I always was told that walks, keep your feet straight ahead, so that, because that gives you the best gripping power when, especially going downhill or uphill, and not walking sort of sideways because you're using the narrow part of your foot instead of the whole flat area of your foot. But yeah, that's where it's always tricky.
Have you heard anything about, I saw some on Facebook, which is not that reliable. Someone was talking about that Adobe's are going to be raising their prices for the subscriptions.
I haven't heard that so far. I actually got a price reduction when I looked at their pricing and found out I'd been a member long enough that they gave me $10 off a month for the next year, which I thought was great. I don't know how I deserved to get it, but I took it. and I've been happy with it. But I also subscribe to their full creative suite. So I'm paying was paying 55. I'm now paying 46 with tax. So yeah, I've had haven't heard anything. They are probably going to start charging for some of the generative AI stuff if you do a whole ton of it. So that might be where the pricing is coming from, because they are talking about doing that. If you do a lot of it, they may charge for it.
Yeah, they're gonna give us tokens.
Yeah.
And then it's you get so many tokens for your standard subscription. And then if you go above that, then you have to pay for it. And every time and it works every time that you click on generative fill, costs you 1 token.
Yeah, but they haven't exactly explained how all of it yet, because they haven't started doing that so far, at least that I've seen. But again, I'm on the higher price tier, so I'm not sure.
You get more tokens that way, Jeff.
Yeah, it
No,
could be.
really, you'll be getting more tokens. And
Yeah.
Jason Odell had that discussion on that in one of his podcasts.
Oh, okay.
And it's not that many months away till they start charging for it.
Yeah.
That won't affect me. So
I actually, the only time I use generative AI now is if I need to expand my background or do something special that way. I'm not putting in clown hats onto my monkeys or doing all that weird stuff. So yeah. I got a question from Dave Strobel. Have any of you used DSLR lenses on mirrorless cameras, especially Tamron or Sigma lenses with Nikon mirrorless? I do that all the time with my Nikon mirrorless, both my Z8 and Z7 VI. I've been using my, just at the Birds of Prey, I used my 70 to 200 F-mount Nikkor lens with a 2x converter. I had absolutely no problems in focusing. My Z8 focused as fast as if I was using a Z lens. So I'm not having any problems. Pretty sure you wouldn't have much problems with Sigma or Tamron. You might be a little slower with the Sigma and Tamron over Nikkor lenses, but I don't know if anybody else has done that on any of the other lenses, but generally that adapter passes all, as long as they're relatively newer lens, F-mount lenses, should work fine.
Jeff, I have a question.
Sure.
I need to connect my Canon camera to my laptop, which will then go to a projector so I can demo some live stuff in the camera to a small group up here. And
Okay.
I have no idea what to use, how, what to look for, or
I think, Tony, if you look at Canon's digital professional software, I think it has it built in through that you can do live shooting like that.
yeah,
I read that and I looked and I couldn't see it. I couldn't find it. So maybe I didn't look hard enough, and I have the latest version as of a couple of months ago. I will check that again also.
yeah, I think you just need to connect using your USB cable from your camera to the computer. Otherwise, you could go from the camera straight to the projector using an HDMI cable from your camera to the projector. That would be the other way, that then they would be able to see what's, showing up in your camera. So you just skip the computer altogether.
Okay, thank you.
I used a tethering software with my Fuji. It's been a while since I've done it, and then have all the images or whatever you're seeing would appear in Lightroom. So it's been a while since I've done that. So, but there's processes to do the tethering.
Yeah, Lightroom would be able to do tethering using the USB cable from your camera, and then Lightroom should be able to tether, except for the brand new cameras, because they're always behind on getting tethering working on the new cameras. Yeah, that's always fun stuff to try to do. Never works quite as easy as you hope. Any other questions?
I got a shareable, so I'll share my
Sure.
screen.
Go ahead, Marty.
I think that others have probably seen this already, but I think it's still kind of fun. So if you haven't seen this, it's a 20 megapixel sensor in a digital film canister configuration. So it pops into old film cameras and can make them into a digital camera. This is a Kickstarter campaign. The downside is that at the Kickstarter price, I think it's, if you get in now, it's like $600. If you wait till this is available on the market, it's like $900. So I don't see the advantage, I guess, at $900 to not just go buy a Rebel or a lower end DSLR or even lower end mirrorless. But it's still kind of a cool concept. You know, if you want to make life out of your old film cameras, this may be one way to do it. So, you know, maybe you've got
Yeah.
a film camera, you got old lenses for it, a lot of lenses, and you don't want to replace all that. You know, that could be one advantage to using something like this.
Yeah, it's sort of interesting. They tried this once before and it didn't fly. So I've never seen it with the film cartridge on there like that, which is a
Yeah.
good spot to put a bunch of the electronics, I would imagine.
And they're using
but-
a Sony Micro Four Thirds sensor, so using a high-end sensor. It's not they're using junk by any means.
Yeah. I wonder how it keeps the pressure plate from pushing the sensor up against the shutter.
Yeah, this intro video is kind of just a fun look at how it came about, but it's not, doesn't get into the details on how that all really works.
Yeah.
So,
I never did hear how much it was, so that's interesting that you got a price on it. I've been seeing it on Facebook quite a bit, and
yeah,
it looks like an interesting toy, but
that's exactly the way Jeff Geyer from the Apple Group, he's the one that saw it on Kickstarter and sent me the pricing on it. But that's exactly what he said, is that he's, you know, we just can't keep buying all these toys.
yeah,
I think it does have a place. I mean, again, if you got a lot of older digital cameras and a lot of lenses, yeah, maybe it's worth the investment for $900. But you know, if you're like most of us and have some pretty decent equipment already, yeah, it just wouldn't be worth the investment.
yeah, I take it the memory card must be in the film canister part.
Yeah, I guess I didn't even see that yet, but
Or maybe the film canister just is the memory card itself, and maybe there's a USB plug-in somewhere. I never did follow through looking at checking into it. I just saw it and thought, well, that's a neat toy. Yeah, like you're gonna put it into your Leica camera.
Yeah. So it says the device captures digital images to an SD memory card. It also includes Wi-Fi connectivity, which is interesting.
Yeah,
Send it out of there. So I imagine you can use whatever size SD card you want to use then.
yeah. See, that's the way they used to do it way back when digital was first coming out, and they came out with something for film cameras. It was
Yeah.
a Wi-Fi connection that they
Right.
had done. I remember that. So, yeah, they're just sort of picking something up that had happened a long time ago and change or just trying to update it and bring it out again. Yeah, yeah, interesting stuff. So, anybody else have anything else? Otherwise, we'll just wrap it up today. Again, we've got a couple nice speakers coming up. The December one, since it's on Christmas Eve, I'm just going to put out a hour or so video. It'll probably be on the new stuff that's in Lightroom and Photoshop. I'll do a bunch of demos for that. November, we have the guy he's from England, and he's going to talk about the Nordic regions, Norway and that. So that should be real interesting. In January, again, we got Jamie Konarski Davidson on lens babies. So we are working on a bunch of new stuff, and we're in the middle of the Wacko competition for those of you. I think I did see a question there in the beginning. The same judges that are judging it right now will be doing the final round of judging. If anybody wants to see that judging, they just need to get a hold of me, and I'll send you a link for that competition. That's going to be November 4th at 11:30 till about 1 or 2 o'clock in the afternoon. And you can watch how the judges pick the medal winner images. I'm just trying to read it here. Paul Mortal is using a cheap processing software called IR FranView. Last time he used it was $39. So we'll, you know, people want to send info on a different processing stuff. We'll put it out there for people, and I'll see if I can find some speakers. I saw a speaker that I might get, just have him talk about the basics of photo mechanics. That's another processing program that actually lets you cull images really quick, but it can do quite a bit more. Although it's not an inexpensive program these days, it's gotten actually very expensive. But I might check in and see about having somebody like that come and talk. And we're looking at a lot of different photographers to bring on in the coming months. So stay tuned, keep showing up. I'm glad we had such a nice turnout for Mike Moats. We'll try to get more speakers like him if we can. So with that, we'll close up a little early, but thanks everybody for coming, and we'll see you next month.
Sounds good.